So starting things off, we're going to talk about winter durum. It's a crop that doesn't currently exist. In Western Canada, there's one variety released in Eastern Canada that really hasn't gone anywhere. The idea behind this initially was, I was just kind of curious. I also do some work on perennial wheat. And so one of the ideas was to try to reduce the complexity in the wheat annual parent to cross to wheatgrass. But when I brought some of this material in, we started to look at it, and actually it looked really nice. So as you can see here, so these are all varieties that I've accessed from various places. Most of them have come from the US Gene Bank. What's gone on there is several breeding programs have kind of deposited their stuff in there to share the wealth, which is really great. So a program from Kansas, Oregon, there's material in here from Russia and Ukraine. But anyway, so we planted this out. It looked really nice. And really I thought the benefits of winter cereals are tremendous, okay? And I thought this is something that we could absolutely work at. So when we put this stuff out in yield trials, well, first and foremost, some of this stuff survived the winter, which is really the critical point. But then when it survived the winter, we had it in yield trials, and it actually did really well from a yield perspective in the range of what winter wheat was. So we thought, okay, this has some potential. Of course, last year, one of the great benefits of winter cereals, like there's too many to list, I'd be here for 20 minutes, I'll be honest with you. But anyways, one of the benefits is typically it avoids fusarium. So of course, last year in the spring durums, there was a lot of issues with fusarium, and that continues to be a problem. And one of the things about winter cereals is not necessarily is it more resistant, but avoids the optimum temperatures for fusarium infection. And so by having winter durums flowering early, it can avoid some of those issues, and it provides a way for farmers to basically stabilize their income. Durum wheat you get paid a very nice amount of money for over regular kind of CWRS even, or other spring wheats. And so this is kind of one of the aspects we thought to try to look at and see if we can go with it, and if we can have something that is really sustainable in a number of ways. So anyway, so I took a look at this stuff. One of the issues is that there is issues with cold tolerance. Okay, so this material isn't as cold tolerant. It's sourced from various places in the world. So there's other places like Italy and stuff that this stuff is grown in. And so the first thing, most important thing for us, is to build something that is cold tolerant. And so first we surveyed lines. We had lines out in rows this year, 150 different varieties that we've got from various places, and we tested it. Excellent range in cold tolerance, all the way from 100% survival down to basically 5% or 0. So there's a real range in the material. What we've started doing now is to try to build some of that, to expand on it. Ultimately, we'd love to get where Rob has his winter wheat at. That would be fantastic. The background about cold tolerance and winter wheat is that basically a lot of the variation clusters around a locus on 5A. So red wheat has A, B, and D genomes, okay? Durum wheat has A and B genomes, and the nice thing is that the cold tolerance for winter wheat typically clusters on the A genome. So what we're trying to do is we're crossing winter wheat with durum wheat, with the idea that we can bring the cold tolerance that Rob's worked on and several other people and move that into durum wheat to really build the cold tolerance so we have a crop that will survive the winter. So when we do this, and I can pass these around, cross between durum wheat, red wheat, our populations are really interesting, because what happens is that you still have some chromosomes from the D genome floating around in there. And so what I have to do is be really careful about picking out stuff that looks like durum wheat. And if I pass these around, you'll look at them, and you'll see some that are kind of intermediate, some that aren't are durum wheat, some that are absolutely look like bread wheat. And so it's quite interesting, but I have to basically go through and select these out. So if you can pick those ones out, like you can see this one here is like winter wheat, right? This one's much more like durum wheat here, and you get some in between, like stuff like this. So I can pass this around. Well, it will be durum wheat. So what happens is after you make that cross, those chromosomes from D kind of float around for a while, and eventually they're lost. Okay, it's due to chromosome pairing during meiosis and things like that. They get lost. Eventually it settles out to getting durum wheat. That's been actually used for midge resistance. In fact, they found that in wheat, in hexaploid wheat, so ABD genome material. They crossed it with Durum wheat, and they brought midge resistance in from that way. So it's a common way to do it. Anyway, so that's the focus on the cold tolerance aspect of things. That's the most important thing right now. So we've got to lick that. I've got a number of populations down here where we've made wheat by Durum crosses. So we've used lots of lines from Rob's material, some other cold tolerant diverse stuff that Rob has kind of found from other programs. So Rob, I should mention, Rob and I work very closely on this. So we're working on those populations. We're getting close to putting things out in rows to really kind of evaluate them. We send stuff to Saskatoon to get evaluated, hopefully that it makes it through the winter or we get some level of selection. Anyway, so that's about that. The next step now is to try to work in the quality. So preliminary analysis on these lines. So we'll harvest this material. We run it through kind of typical kind of quality analysis that we can do here. So we do things like test weights are important, proteins, things like that, but we also do falling numbers, so looking at basically how intact the starch is. But we also do a test called SDS sedimentation value, which gives you an idea of the quality of the gluten. And in this case, there's a big range. Most of it is not really where we want it to be. So that's the next big challenge. The other challenge will be, because we're crossing with red wheats, is to actually select out that really good Durum color that people want. So there's a lot of work. Like I said, we've got to do the cold tolerant stuff, and then we'll start working on the quality stuff. But once we get that cold tolerant aspect licked, then it's kind of time to start working on the quality, so that that will have something that will be suitable and what's expected from the marketplace here in Canada. So how far away? Honestly, no, yeah, 10, 15 years for sure. Yeah, really, because we're starting. We've just started to make crosses. I've got some populations in the back that are okay, but from a quality perspective, like, they're not acceptable. I'll tell you that right now, right? Because say, to get that cold tolerance built in there, it's going to be a little bit. Okay, so.
How many sites are you testing it at for cold tolerance?
So this past year we had sites here in Lethbridge. It's been small because we haven't really had any funding for it until now. So we had it at Vauxhall, Lethbridge, and Warner. We were able to see some differential. We also had it at Saskatoon. But at Saskatoon, the trial was seeded a little bit late. And in fact, the rye never even made it through the winter there. So that just shows you the level of pressure. So we haven't tried that yet. We'll talk to the people from Alberta Ag and see if they're willing to donate some locations to test this stuff at. But like I said, it's early days, Claire, so you can't, really I'm more interested in selection within my populations to be able to skew it, get stuff that's cold tolerant, and then be able to roll out and evaluate it. So we're getting closer to that. Yeah. So there's a little bit of work done at Swift Current. Initially, we had put a project together that didn't go anywhere, and they were interested actually in cold tolerant spring Durums that could be seeded very early, which goes into what Brian's going to talk about in a little bit. Rob and I were going to basically make those crosses. We'd take all the cold tolerant winter Durums out of that, and they would get the spring Durums. So they're doing a little bit of work on that. I think, I've kind of expanded, done a little bit more kind of beyond that level of that initial project. There was, like I said, a variety released in Ontario. That was sourced out of a program in Virginia Tech. That line isn't very cold tolerant, and so there are some issues there. I continue to source germplasm from places like Germany, other places like that where they're actively working on this. They've done some cold tolerant screening too to try to widen the germplasm pool. So in terms of widening that germplasm pool, I should talk about that. Basically, I'm trying to bring in traits from a number of sources. So I brought in things like, there's lines that have higher falling numbers, so I focused on bringing that in because I think that's important to maintain quality. Midge resistance, solid stem, fusarium resistance is a major one we're focusing on now. So we're crossing with all of the moderately susceptible lines from spring Durum, but we're also crossing with lines like Emerson that Rob has, some lines from Ontario that are decent. They might not have the cold tolerance, but they'll have the fusarium resistance. So we're trying to bring up and build this winter Durum germplasm pool that we can kind of start on, and then we can start to build from there. So that's the thing, like, we're building. It's not like I can source material directly from Rob's program, make a cross, and then go on. We're trying to build this overall pool that then, if it's me or anybody else, that wants to start working on this stuff that they can use. So that's really the critical thing here, is to, you know, have a big vision.
Repeat the questions. Some of these older people don't hear too well.
I forget what the question was. Am I the only breeder? So as of right now, I guess yes, but there is an effort in Swift Current. So they're doing a little bit of work there. But I don't think, just from what I've seen and talking to the breeder there, I think what we're doing is a little bit more diverse, a little bit larger than their effort right now. But some of it, yep. Some of the lines here came from that area, yep, absolutely. And that's some of the more cold tolerant material. That material is really old. Like, that stuff is from like the 1960s and 70s. You know, but you go where you get the cold tolerance, and then you go from there and try to build upon it. So there are other issues, like typically spring durum is pretty stripe rust resistance. Some of this stuff, the stripe rust resistance is questionable. So that's also something we're building in from that. We can get some of that from the spring durum by winter wheat crosses, or spring durum by winter durum crosses. So we're actively looking for that to build that up. So, you know, we have something that is really adapted to basically southern Alberta, but typically the durum growing areas. So.
Are you, sorry.
Go ahead.
Are you incorporating Streak Mosaic as well? Just because if you got, let's say this takes off, then you have more winter cereals within the, let's say, Prairie Canada.
Yeah.
And then potential disease transfer over. So are you looking at that as well?
So we've crossed with some of Rob's material that has that in there. So we're not actively screening it like with mite colonies and stuff that Rob has it, but we are building that into the germplasm pool, yeah. So it is important, I agree with you, yeah.
So is the objective of this stuff to be able to just deliver it as a quad, or will it have to have its own class?
Great question. We don't. That's putting the cart ahead of the horse a little bit. We don't know. I mean, I suspect it'll be similar to of what winter wheat is compared to maybe CWRS. Rob says he's getting really close to that now, which is interesting. We hope to get there, but we'll see. I can't say right now. That's a lot of breeding, right? That's, I mean, how many years? 60 years of breeding, 70 years of breeding that they've got to this level. You can't expect to jump there right away, but we'll do everything we can to kind of do that. So through we're going to have testing done in Winnipeg, or the hope is that we'll get testing done in Winnipeg. We'll get a really good idea of the quality profile of this stuff so we can start to use the proper parents.
Maybe I missed it, and I'm sorry if I did, but what's the yield potential difference between spring durum and winter durum?
I haven't tested that, but I know this stuff yields very similar to winter wheat.
Okay, so you're expecting about 20%, 50%,
yeah,
at least.
yeah, yeah.
Because I think the potential, I know potential is imaginary, but potential is huge if we can get winter durum.
Oh,
yeah,
okay, well,
no, I agree. Yeah, I agree with that. And that's why the project is so interesting and worth looking at. Like I said, there's a lot of hurdles to jump. Don't expect a variety to release next year, right?
What you're up against is people funding you because it's so far in advance, and it's a vicious circle, because if you don't get started, you're never going to get there.
Sure. Well, no, the Wheat Commission and WGRF have shown interest in this, and so away we go. Right. That's the great thing, is they've communicated to me that they know this is a long-term project, and so they know that, you know, they don't expect a home run hit in 3 years. Yeah. Yeah. Certainly with climate change, you look at moisture patterns, like what they're predicting from a climate change perspective is that this is it, right? That basically we run into serious moisture issues. Look at these winter cereals. This is dry land. I mean, they're not hurting at all, right? They're going to do fine. You look at some of the spring cereals, certainly on dry land, there's some challenges there. So if this is what the trend is going to be, well then, hey, we're ready for it, right? So
we're just about out of time, but since I'm hosting, I get the last question. What's the 6-row type looking one that you've been passing around? Or is it just really fat?
It's just really fat.
Wow. And that's the winter durum as well?
Yeah, so this is what you'll typically see in the plot. So like I said, you'll get stuff that looks like this and like this. The key is you pick stuff that looks more like winter durum, and then over generations, you start to see it sort out. So you just kind of, as Rob says, I like the term, you shape the population, right? So you have all these segregants, you go through and you pick the heads out. Next generation, when you plant it out, it looks like winter durum. It starts to look more like winter durum, and away you go. So yeah, so you have a keen eye, because some of this stuff is really intermediate, right? So you're kind of like, is that or is it not? Yeah, so.
It will make awesome feed.
I'll give one burning question left to Jamie if anybody has one. Okay, join me in thanking Dr. Jamie Larsen. Thank Canada here.